So, hello, I'm Nick. I run a little company called English Hemp down in Devon. Been doing CBD for a few years with high intention. So I do sound frequency work, I do alchemy and a lot of healing love. But that's not what we're talking about now. I'm talking about the history of hemp because I think that's really interesting. It gives a context where we are. Lots of people don't know about it, so there may be some things that are of interest. I've got this idea that hemp was actually fundamental to the development of civilization on so many levels. I'm not talking about the medicinal stuff today, but you know, without the endocannabinoidal system we wouldn't be here anyway. But I'm talking about civilization and the role that hemp's had in that, which really fascinates me. So starting at the beginning then, the Neolithic era at the end of the Ice Age, we've actually found some remains of pottery shards, 11,000 BC, with rope inlaid around the pottery. And that's the oldest wheel we found is 5,000 BC, so it makes it twice as old as the wheel that we've been using hemp for. There's stories Carl Sagan developed in his history of cultural development about how when we came out of the caves and we were just wearing the furs of animals, the first clothes we made came from hemp. So you've got hemp rope and hemp clothing there at the very beginning, before civilization, before farming, before any of this sort of stuff really happened. And then it goes on through time. Between 10,000 and 3,000 BC, there's just loads of archaeological evidence for hemp in many uses. By the time we get to China, this is 1600 BC, the oldest encyclopedia in the world, called the Zai Zhao, mentions hemp as one of the 5 most important crops in China, and has chapters on how hemp is managed, farmed, looked after, harvested. An important thing. And then the oldest dictionary in the world, called the Ya, which is 300 BC, again from China, also mentions hemp, the male and the female plants, in great detail. And you can see that it was a bedrock of their civilization already, and has been since. The next snapshot I have is Rome. Pliny the Elder wrote a Historialis Naturalis, 37 volumes, this enormous encyclopedia of everything the Romans knew. And a whole book of this encyclopedia was about hemp. It was so important. It was a 37th of everything they knew about agriculture, basically. And at the same time, that was AD 80, at the same time we've got more archaeological remains in Scotland of hemp rope up at Hadrian's Wall in a hill fort. So at the same time this guy in Rome, in the centre of everything, is writing about hemp, it's being used all over the empire, all the way to the edge, to Hadrian's Wall. It was just everywhere. Another great example I like to use is Genghis Khan, because everyone's heard of him. People don't know he actually had a third of the world's wealth at one point. He had the biggest contiguous empire ever in history. He invented the Silk Road. He was unconquerable and amazing at what he did. His armies on horseback, armed with hemp bowstrings, had a longer range than anyone else. He was undefeatable. Hemp, basically for him, was the secret weapon that changed everything. And what he did was the biggest empire ever. Shifting forwards a little bit, we go to 1150, which is the first European paper ever made in northern Spain. The story goes that there were some Arabs who were pirates, and they captured some Chinese people who were scholars, and they had all this paper, they had all these books, and they didn't know what paper was. So they got the idea of paper from them, and within 20 years they'd built the first hemp paper mill in Europe. And this was just as paper was starting to be a thing. It was as the clergy was losing control of religion as a spoken thing given at churches by people like me telling you what to do. And the point where books could be printed. So the first Gutenberg Bible in 1456 is printed on hemp paper. And it shifts everything. We've now got movable type. We can now print, the printed word can be disseminated. All thanks to this new technology of hemp and the printing press. And the political shift from that is just enormous. And hemp paper is still around today. My business cards are on hemp. Hemp makes fantastic paper. It's much better for paper than trees. No one likes deforestation. And that's the way we normally get paper from, chopping down trees. All those animals and birds, you know, just doesn't matter. They've lost their home. And these trees take decades to grow. It's a whole environment. It's nature as it should be, especially in these lands, which revert to forest anyway. So we don't have to do that. We can do hemp paper instead. And when we start looking at hemp paper, even apart from the lack of deforestation, it's just better. So in the same space and the same time, you can get 4 times the yield from hemp you can get from trees. The hemp paper is also 4 times stronger. So you can recycle it 4 times more, it's 16 times better. Paper is made of cellulose. The tree is 30% cellulose. You've got to extract 70% of your tree matter to make paper and just get rid of it. A lot of chemicals, a lot of water, a lot of machinery, energy, horribleness. With hemp, you can ret it on the land with no machinery at all, and then you can take out the shiv in the middle of the hemp plant, and it's 85% cellulose versus 30%. So to make it into paper is easier. So it's 4 times the yield, 4 times stronger, so 16 times better. It's got a higher amount of cellulose. It's got no lignin in it, which means you need way less chemicals for processing. And because it's acid-free, it lasts longer. That's why the Magna Carta, the Gutenberg Bible, the Vedic text, everything that was printed on hemp hundreds, thousands of years ago is still there. Modern paper made out of trees doesn't last 20, 30 years. So it's better. So next up we get to the British Empire. This is when hemp really did change things globally. Every sail, every rope on every boat was made of hemp. Hemp is the strongest natural material for making canvas, which comes from the word cannabis, and all the sails that were made of it. So an example is HMS Victory had 27 miles of hemp rope. The fleet that beat the Armada, 200 ships, they reckon it was 10,000 hectares of hemp just for that fleet. And half of them got destroyed that day. So hemp became fundamental to the British Empire. In 1611, King James I therefore made it mandatory to grow. It was so fundamental. The Navy took over a lot of the growing and processing, but we had to have it. And then after that, as the empire spread, it became mandatory in all the colonies, from America, India, everywhere we went, you had to grow hemp by law. It was taxed, and it was the biggest crop out there. It's probably the biggest source of revenue to the British Empire from hemp. And people just might not know that. I don't know. It blows my mind. And there was a point where, because it was mandatory to grow, it was essentially a money tree. The only money tree we've ever had. You can actually grow money. So from there we get into the Industrial Revolution, where the idea of the next phase of development happens, and factories and that sort of thing. And when this was starting to brew was when the British Empire really was at its fore. We'd discovered and owned everything, and we were building these amazing ships and fleets and navies. And the processes for making the hemp ropes and the hemp sails started to become more like a factory process. The buildings became more like factory buildings. In fact, the longest buildings still in Europe are the hemp rope walks, where they make the hemp. So there's this idea, which I like to encourage, that actually the Industrial Revolution, the spinning jennies, all of this manufacturing, this next phase, only happened because of the bedrock of hemp as a big production and learning the lessons from industrializing hemp for the Navy. We go on a little later and we get to a very exciting time in hemp. We get to the point where science is coming into it, and my favourite word, and the word you have to tell everybody, which is chemergy. Metallurgy is making stuff out of metal. Chemergy is using plants and using science to make magic out of that. So there was a point where they had oils, varnishes, paints, plastics, everything you can make from a barrel of oil made of hemp. This is chemergy. This is the magic. So in 1896, when Rudolf Diesel invented his diesel engine, it was designed to run on plant oils, and it was running on hemp from the word go. In 1941, as you probably all know, when Henry Ford built his first Model T car, it was made of hemp plastic. He grew hemp himself, and it would run on hemp. There's a wonderful video, if you haven't seen it, on YouTube of him smashing the plastic with an axe, and it just bounces off. 10 times stronger than steel, 3 times lighter than steel. Amazing plastic. And it's a bioplastic. It doesn't fill the seas and cause all that plastics problem. By 1938, everyone was really excited about this. Popular Science magazine had a full episode called The $1 billion Crop. 25,000 uses of hemp. Everything you can make with oil, you can make with hemp. Everything you can make with any other plant, you can make with hemp. Everything we need, we can make with hemp. In fairness, it was before computers. But, so this could have been something epic, this $1 billion crop, and everybody could have grown it in their back garden. They could have made their own clothes and paper and ropes and democratized it. But you can't have that, can you? So this slide is actually called Excess Utility versus Capitalism. So when this all came about, it was a bit too much for a few people. It was at the same time that DuPont invented the process from nylon, from fossil fuels, for making plastic ropes. And that's terrible competition for hemp rope, which was 90% of the rope until then. And it just so happened that DuPont was on the board of GM, a car company, and Henry Ford was leading the chemurgists on the hemp side. So you've got this Ford GM thing happening, and you've also got a thing with DuPont nylon versus hemp rope happening. So DuPont was a very rich man, and his banker was called Andrew Mellon, who was the Secretary of State for the Treasury in the US, who was in charge of passing the drugs laws. He got his son-in-law, Harry Anslinger, on board, who used to be in charge of the prohibition of alcohol until that failed, and retasked him to look at the prohibition of marijuana. And this is when the propaganda kicked in. Reefer madness, the assassin of youth, all these things, to petrify people and turn them off it. Showing you that it was the evil weed and just ignoring all these other amazing uses. It really is one of those things that is a classic conspiracy theory, to be honest.
When was that? What year was that?
So the Anslinger started in 1933. DuPont started his lobbying of the US in 1935. Reefer madness was 1935, and then this resulted in 1937 in the Marijuana Tax Act. So they said, we're not going to ban it, but 1 pound of hemp is taxed at $100, when a car was $200. So they just killed the market.
They were able to make the nylon more cheaply, they just made it impossible.
They just got rid of the competition. Yeah.
It's like demonised it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if they carried on, would they have been able to make hemp cheaper than they made nylon?
Yes. Yes. And yeah, well, it hasn't happened, so no one can say yes or no.
But you can imagine that
hemp is definitely good enough for a rope for so many uses. I mean, it's rot resistant. It's fantastic. Right? It's the best natural fibre.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it rots down. You know, you leave it in the corner of your garden, and it's gone in 5 years. So it doesn't matter. Whereas the plastic's 3,000 years. You know, DuPont's nylon ropes last forever. So we got to this point where it was all about to happen, to be $1 billion crop, and everyone could grow their own, and money trees and abundance, and everyone sharing, and then it just got crushed. And so after that, the whole hemp industry closed down completely. Now, there's a medicinal side of this talk I'm not doing today, but that also has a 4,000 or 5,000 year history. And there, again, just to touch on it, it went from, there was a situation where opium was the main painkiller, but it was addictive and horrible. And by about the mid-1800s, it was all medicinal cannabis. Queen Victoria was taking it. There were hemp tinctures in 1882 done in London, but that's a whole different story. But that also was closed down by Big Pharma, just like the industrial uses were closed down by fossil fuel industry, basically.
Did they have sort of like a CBD equivalent of that?
Yeah, well, yeah, they didn't call it that, but it was a whole plant extract, so it had the CBD in. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So I kind of like to end the talk there because we are still in this phase where the ban is so complete that some people don't know the power of hemp, but we have an opportunity now to bring it back again, hopefully. And it's better in every market it goes into. It's better. Everything that we can make out of polluting death, we can make out of this. We should, we must, we can. My thoughts. Any questions?
Some research that you've done and you put that all together, but you haven't sort of published anything in it?
No, there's a chap who does the history of certain stuff. He did the history of opium, then he's just done the history of cannabis. That's quite interesting, because he goes into the spiritual side as well. I like to think there's a nutrition side. It's the only plant with omega-3, 6 and 9 essential fatty acids, and all your essential amino acids. There's a medicine side with the CBDs, there's an industrial side I was mentioning, and there's this new wave with the building stuff, you know, the hempcrete and all that sort of stuff. Well, not new, but yeah. So there's lots of different, hemp is fractal, it goes in every direction you want. So no one's really written everything down in one space.
Would you say that the whole world could be run on something that's completely sustainable and doesn't damage anything?
Well, I also didn't get into carbon sequestration through hemp. There's hemp and biochar on ways we can actually improve global warming, which is quite underdeveloped at the moment. But essentially, a bit like growing forests to suck all the CO2 out, you can do the same with hemp. And it grows quicker, and it's a massive biomass machine, and then you can biochar that, and then the carbon is no longer labile, and it's sequestered for 1,000 odd years.
Why isn't the planet run on purely hemp?
Because I don't run the planet. It's run on fossil fuels. How much money have they made? It's one of those things that highlights those issues. Thank you.